So hi everyone, welcome. Today we're going to talk about default to open, creating a DevOps culture. So my name is Katrina Novakovic. I come from London in the UK. I'm a business architect working at Red Hat, and my role is really just to help organizations strategically implement open source software, manage their communities, and look at principles around open source as well. I focus mainly on the people, the processes part, and the culture, and how that all fits in with the technology that they use. So what we're going to look at today is what actually is DevOps, why culture is important, why culture is important for DevOps adoption, how you can transition your teams to work in a more DevOps way, and then looking at some tools that are open source that you can use yourselves to help with this adoption. So what is DevOps? So DevOps is a methodology, and it's a way of getting business ideas realized faster, and it uses cultural philosophies, so people, practices, and tools. So again, it's the people, processes, and technologies involved. And it aims to establish a culture in an environment where you're looking at how you can build, test, and deliver software faster, more often, and also to a higher quality. It looks at simplifying processes, and the word DevOps is a combination of the word developers and operations, but actually it's much more than just these two terms. It involves other people within the organization, which includes change managers, testers, QA, network security, so it works with people across the whole organization. And this diagram here just represents 6 of the key areas within DevOps. So you've got build and deploy, data management, release, information and reporting, test and verification, and then the area that I'm going to focus on today, which is culture and organization. So you're kind of looking at where you are, where you want to be, and how you improve along that journey. This is a great book that I recommend that you read, Accelerate, by Jez Humble and a few other people. Has anyone read this book? A few fans there. It's a really good book that looks at the software delivery performance of a variety of teams across multiple industries. So basically, it does some research looking at how teams operate and identifies the elite high performers and looks then at the lower performers, and it sees what are they doing differently, how are they working. And basically, they found that the high-performing elite teams are using DevOps within their practices, they're using agile methodologies, and they saw there was these 4 metrics they pulled out on how to measure. So they look at deployment frequency, lead time for changes, time to restore service, and the change failure rate. When they found that the elite performing companies were using cloud-native technologies, so microservices, containers, Kubernetes, and a whole load of other stuff as well, but it wasn't just these technologies, it was how they were working, it was the culture that they were using. And as well as this book, at the bottom there's also a link to a PDF file, and this just gives results of the studies, so I recommend you have a look at that as well. And it's just important to highlight that code has no business value until it's deployed. So what you're wanting to do really is to innovate faster, develop faster, deliver faster, and to change faster. You just want to do everything faster. And you basically want to have a continuous cycle of frequent changes. So part of this is looking at continuous delivery, which involves DevOps practices, and then you want to have a continuous feedback loop where you're able to change things as you're going along. So that was a quick introduction to what DevOps is. Now we're going to look at why culture is important for DevOps adoption. So when you introduce new technologies, this will also impact the organizational structure. So this is the people, the processes that you have there. Oftentimes, organizations will get a new technology, but if they just use it but work in the old ways that they're used to, they don't really receive the benefits that the new technology can bring. And so it's important that you look at the culture and the way that you're working. So what actually is culture? There's several definitions of what it can be. I tend to think of it as a group of people that form certain behaviors, habits, and values which influence how we act, including how we communicate and collaborate. And there's also organizational culture, but within an organization, there's also people in different teams doing things differently. There's different ways of thinking and different ways of doing things. So for example, if you've got a group of developers, you may be working within the same team, within the same group of people, working on different projects, and the different teams are working in different ways on different projects as well. Other organizations, you work on like a project basis, so you may not have a core team that you always work with. You work with different people depending on what the project requires. So even as a developer within one organization, you may have to work in different ways depending on what the project requires and who you're working with. And having said that, there's no agreed definition of the correct culture or the right culture. You can't just take a culture that was successful at one company or that worked at one team and try to apply it to what you're doing. It doesn't always work that way. So an example is if you think of a bank and you think of a nuclear power plant. These are both industries that have strict regulations, and there's also control and structure in place for them. But they don't operate in the same way. There's different securities and safety measures that you have to consider for these industries. And then if you compare that to a software startup company, again, that's different. So you can't just say, this is the best culture, I'm going to apply it for all circumstances. So then how do you kind of approach culture? How can you improve your culture if there's no right way to do it? There are certain cultural principles and values of DevOps that we've seen that are common, and the Accelerate book supports this as well. We like to see that they're based on open source communities, so how open source project works and agile ways of working. And Red Hat seems to think there's these three kind of key areas of culture. There's the mindsets, so this is what you're thinking. If you're used to thinking and doing things in a certain way, it can be quite a challenge to then have to change and start doing things in a different way, thinking of a new way to approach things. And people often find that just this mindset of how do I shift from the old to the new, that's really the first challenge you've got to get over. Then you have behaviors, which is just your actions. The intentions aren't good enough. You could want to change in your mind, but if you're not actually working in new ways, you're not going to get the benefit. And behavior is made up of three aspects. You've got your capabilities, which are your skill sets that you have. You've got the environment, so your physical surroundings, the opportunities out there. And then you've got your motivation. So you need to have an incentive to want to change. If there's no incentive, if you haven't got a reason, you're not going to change your behavior. And then you've got practices, which is your processes, and best guides, the way you're actually going to do something. And all three of these parts make up DevOps culture. So open source, it's more than just code, it is the culture. And when I think about open source, it's really all about the community. It's people working together to achieve something greater. So when you look at what is open source culture, it's about having engaged communities where you can respond to change more quickly. It's where you're sharing a problem, the community has a common purpose that they're hoping to achieve, and you can solve problems faster if you all work together. And when you're working together, you need to work together in a transparent way, so you're sharing information with one another. Code's visible, you can modify it, you can put it back in, and you're sharing all the information that you have. And then there's open standards that preserve business agility. So all of these things can be applied to DevOps and how you can run your teams. And then at the bottom, I've just listed a few of these values that there are. So collaboration, transparency, inclusivity, adaptability, and community. Now, it's great when you look at these values and you think, yep, we need collaboration, we want transparency, but what does that actually mean? How do you collaborate more in your teams? Our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, wrote a book called The Open Organization, and it takes like the open source principles and applies it to an organization, to how you can move from a traditional closed organization to a more open one. So a closed organization tends to have the usual hierarchy structure where people at the bottom are striving for pay rises and power, and they want to move up the chain because when you're at the top at a management position, that's where you have the power and the authority. An open organization takes a bottom-up approach where you want to kind of collect all the ideas from the bottom. Meritocracy wins, so those with the best ideas get chosen, and you're kind of working together to achieve that common purpose that goes above self-interest. Now, Red Hat says that we're an open organization, but that doesn't mean that we're 100% open. It's not like you can be closed or open. For example, there's certain regulations in finances, so with the stock market stuff, so we can't always share financial information, and we don't share everyone's salaries within Red Hat either. So it's not like saying, I want to be an open organization and move off from a closed one. We have this way of looking at it, so a mindset again, which is degrees of openness. So you're kind of saying, I'm not really closed because very few companies are closed. There is collaboration that takes place. There is a community. There is purpose. So think of it as a scale. How closed and open are you? You might think you're more on the closed end and you want to move towards being open. And it's quite subjective as well. So if you ask different people within your company, you might position yourselves at different points within the scale. It's the same way you can look at DevOps. It's not, are we doing DevOps, are we not? You're probably somewhere along this journey. So you want to really think, whereabouts are we on this journey? Where do we want to be? It's hard to say, I want to be completely 100% compliant in DevOps, because there isn't even a definition for that. But if there was, it might be unattainable. You just want to move 10% closer towards that goal. So that can be part of that mindset, is just thinking, how do I move closer to my goal of implementing more DevOps within our organization? So these are the 5 characteristics that I spoke about, and there's just some points that you can consider is what you can do to be more open within your organization. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can have a look at the slides afterwards. But just looking at the first one, it's transparency. Think about what you can share with others. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And then inviting people to participate within the process as well. How can you share how you've made decisions and what you're doing, and let people know where they can get information if they need to. So basically, you can pick one of these, and as a team, all work together to achieve one of them. So transitioning to a DevOps culture. The degree to which an organization adopts DevOps will be dependent on their value for tolerance, so how willing they are to change, and also whether they can identify the areas that will bring about the most change. You don't want to be focusing on the wrong things and dedicating time to something that doesn't produce any effort. And it really is looking at the team behavior, skills, and ways of working. And DevOps is a hard thing to implement because you need every single person within the team to buy into that new culture. If you have some people that are kind of working towards it and willing, and there's other ones that are hesitant, it's not really going to work. You need everyone to be sharing and having that community purpose that you're driving for. And it's also a phased approach, so start small and build up. Don't do a big bang, we're just going to go and do full whack DevOps. So where does it start? Step 1. It starts with leadership buy-in. You really need to have the leadership team there to help structure your organization and your teams. So part of this is oftentimes traditional organizations kind of have a rigid control and command structure where you're kind of dictated to what you're doing and how you're running. You want to move to have more autonomy, which is where your teams kind of have self-direction and you're able to make decisions within the team level. You can also have cross-functional teams. And this is not just where Dev and Ops are working together, but those within the other organizations. So sometimes if you need help from another department, you might get pushback saying, I can't help you, I'm too busy, or give me a project code that I can charge my time to and then I can help you. And it's kind of putting up barriers towards this. So you want your leadership team to be able to make it easier for different teams within the organization to work together. Leaders also need to put the right incentives in place to drive behaviors. So this could be to do with career advancement. So if you're looking for promotions, pay rises, bonuses, and recognition, this should be done at a team level rather than on an individual basis. So this could be putting kind of team metrics in place and also having reward systems that are peer generated. For example, at Red Hat, we have a system where we can log on, and if someone's done a good job, we have some allocated points that we can give them, and then that person that receives them can then exchange it for gift cards and vouchers. So it's peers recognizing peers, not just management saying to people they've done a good job. But of course, there is approval mechanisms and structures in place so people don't abuse these systems. So it's not you give everyone complete control, it's kind of a structured, ordered approach that you're taking. I'm going to touch on this next point a bit later, but you need to create an environment for failure and experimentation. You shouldn't really have a blame culture where you're not allowed to make mistakes. This isn't really good for the DevOps world. And also the importance of middle managers. You want to give dev and operations teams and others within the organizations the freedom to do stuff, that autonomy, but also middle managers do play a key role. They look after training, career development, performance reviews, and also allocate budgets and resources for teams to do stuff. So they have a vital role to play. So basically, you need your leadership team to give you this buy-in to then be able to fully get the resources needed to do the DevOps adoption. But as I said before, there isn't one right or correct approach to take, and how your teams are structured, what incentives you have in place can vary from organization to organization. The key thing is just to have that leadership buy-in. The next step is a discovery process. So this aims at getting stakeholders agreed on the shared goals that you need to take going forwards. So in terms of open source, this is having a community that has that shared purpose. Everybody has their own individual objectives that they want to achieve, but they all come together for that shared purpose of what they want to do. So you have to start by identifying the stakeholders. So again, this is more than just the dev and ops teams, it's everyone involved. And then each of these stakeholders has to determine what their objectives are. Why do they want this DevOps culture? What do they want to achieve? You then align everyone's goals and priorities to ensure that there's good integration between them. And you need to have this clear consensus. You need to have this shared goals and purpose to know what you're doing and what you want to get out of it. And then also you need to look at the current processes and practices that you have in place to see where you are now and where you want to go. And hopefully you can start to automate these as you move forwards. You then need to identify your key challenges. So a good way to do this is just to ask teams, what are the most annoying and painful things that they experience? What are the problems they have out there? Because if you can identify problems that the majority of people are facing, you have a better chance of everyone wanting to resolve them. So some common challenges are to do with organizational hierarchies. You can't get the right people involved. There's too much bureaucracy. There's siloed teams where there's little or no collaboration between them. A common one as well is outsourced teams. This is where if you want to change what you're doing, but you're working with different people from different organizations, sometimes there's certain contracts in place where they're just told to deliver something, and you can't really change what they're doing. As long as they deliver it, everything's fine. So you have these barriers with third parties, and how can you change what you're doing if you can't affect the rest of the system? Also, teams are distributed, people are working in different time zones, so how can you collaborate effectively? You can't always have face-to-face meetings. How do you include people on video conferences? These kind of things need to be considered. Priorities is another important issue. Sometimes there's a lack of priorities. Developers just pick the tasks that they're most interested in working on and don't really think about what would add that business value and what doesn't. Or the other problem is you have constantly changing priorities. If you're working on several projects and everything's important, you're always context switching. You're moving from one thing to another, and it's really hard just to focus on what you're doing. So having a clear set of priorities about what you want to achieve is very important. Oftentimes, people are territorial, they want command, they don't want to share information because they think knowledge is power. But we say knowledge is power only when it's shared. If you're just hoarding it to yourself, you're really only benefiting yourself. You need to share it so that everyone can benefit and you can actually reach the goals that you want to achieve. And it's due to that lack of trust with the knowledge sharing. And then also shared environments. There's limitations for integrated testing, for example. So often we find with customers that they'll, when they're working within their own local environments doing development work, it's fine. They've got certain stages that they need to go to. Some testing platforms they have full control over that they work on. But then when it comes to integrated testing, this is often used by different teams. And in order to access those environments, somebody else needs to configure that. They don't have the access rights for it. They need to import data into it. So they're kind of limited by what they can do. So if they just had more control over their testing environments, it could lead to better software delivery performance in the end. And the final point is a fail-fast culture. So the aim here is for teams to feel safe to try out and experiment new things, where it's a blame-free environment. And the idea here is that you can experiment in a structured way where the quicker you fail, the quicker you can fix problems. So when you think about what failure means for your customers, the end users, if you've got something that fails in production, you're going to get negative feedback, you're going to get low customer satisfaction scores. So wouldn't it be better for developers to find these failures out in test and in their pre-production environments before it goes live? So basically, this comes down to the mindset component again. You need to perceive failure as fine-tuning processes and products and to spot errors and defects. You want to move where you can openly discuss failures and not just be afraid that someone's going to blame you or there'll be negative consequences. Some people are afraid of admitting mistakes because it will affect their bonus or their pay promotion. So again, it's up to leadership to make it an environment where you're free to fail and free to discuss things. If you're failing constantly, and if you're just like spotting these errors and mistakes that you're going to be able to look at, you need to have the right training and the tools to be able to fix them all. So there's no point if you're kind of in a high-pressured environment where you're finding all these problems, but you don't have the resources to fix them. So every problem you find is just left there to fix at a future date. You should have the resources in place that allow you to go and fix everything that you found and make it better. And so in order to do this, we recommend that you work in iterations. So for example, in Agile, 2-week sprints, things like that. And the idea is not just to fail fast, but to fail small. You don't want to spend 6 months working on something, you make a mistake at the end of it, and then realize you have to redo it all, and basically you've just wasted 6 months. So it's just working in these small chunks, testing like as you go along, spotting failures, and correcting it as you go along. So what we believe is that you should avoid long-term role maps. You should identify the key challenges and then just do enough to get started before you move on to the next step. Break things down, work in small chunks, and get that rapid feedback going so you know how to correct yourself as you go forwards. You also want to communicate and share things, and this also includes celebrating progress and successes. So if you're doing well, don't just raise all the negative things that have happened. Take the time to kind of celebrate with your colleagues and recognize the great work that you're doing. And then you want to build new skills, and this can be through pairing up and mentoring other people. So it's using that collaboration approach to learning. And then experimenting. So as I just mentioned, starting small, doing those small failures and going forward. But the idea is just to start. Don't waste time planning all these things that you're going to do. Just try something. If your approach doesn't work, correct it and try again. So now I'm briefly going to look at some open source tools that you can use to help you. So the first one is this Open Organization Culture Assessment. So this is a tool created by Red Hat, but it's open source and it's available for you to look at and download yourself. And what this does is it looks at those 5 characteristics, so transparency, inclusivity, adaptability, collaboration, and community. And basically, within the tool, you can rank yourself against certain levels and identify where you currently are and then where you want to be. And it will give you recommendations of how you can get there and how you can improve. So in this example, the collaboration is kind of given a score 1, which is one of the lowest ones. Your team might decide that this is the area you want to focus on. So if everyone within the team decides they want to improve on the collaboration aspect, you have greater chance of improving it if you have this focus of what you want to achieve. There's no point somebody wanting to become more transparent or another team within the organization wanting to improve another aspect, because you're all kind of going after different goals. If you can agree on what you want to do going forward, you can improve that metric and then move on to the next one. As I said before, it's not like if you're going to improve collaboration, you're going to get there, you're going to be perfect. It's continuous building, but you just want to get 10% better. You just want to get 25% better from where you are. So start small and have small goals to aim for. The next tool is a team capabilities tool called Ready to Innovate. So this looks at capabilities of teams that can affect software delivery performance. So this includes looking at the architecture, automation, ways of working environment, and leadership and vision. So what you do as a team, you have the developers and the operations team that you can either run it separately or together as a joint thing, and just look at all of these sections for your group. So for example, for architecture, are you using are you using kind of monolith ways of working, or are you breaking things down into modules? Are you using microservices? how kind of agile are you using architecture? And then automation, is there a lot of manual steps? Are you doing manual testing? Are some parts automated, other parts not? So just looking whereabouts you are on that scale. Ways of working is how you're approaching projects. What methodologies are you using? How are you tackling them? The working environment is how you're kind of working together and collaborating. And the leadership and vision is how are leaders doing things? Are they equipping you? Do you know what your purpose is? Do you know how what you're doing is contributing to your goals and what you're doing? So within the tool, you kind of enter your team's details, you rank yourself along these 5 methods, and then you rate yourselves on the developer scale and also on the operations scale. You can capture some notes, and then at the end of it, you get like a similar output as well to the other one that shows you that spider diagram and then some key areas. So you can see which of these areas that you're at. So for example, if you scored low in architecture and higher in the other areas, you may decide that we want to focus on improving our architecture. Or we scored lower on automation, and actually if we improved automation, this would help in a load of other areas as well. If we automated stuff, we'd have more time to free up to work in a different way. So it's just a good way that you can identify where you are and what areas you should be focusing on. And there's a link at the bottom to the GitHub place where you can download the tool and use it yourself. And then the last one here is the Open Practice Library. So this is kind of a community-driven repository of practices that there are out there that you can use. And then on the next slide, I've just got what those key areas are. So there's discovery practices. So this can help you to identify those goals within your organization. So good ones here to look at are impact mapping. That's a very useful technique you can use to identify what your goals are for your team, for other teams within the organization. You've then got delivery practices, and the most useful ones that customers have found have been Kanban and retrospectives. So again, you don't need to try and use all the tools and techniques of what you're doing. You can just pick certain ones, try them. If they work for you, great, carry on. If they don't, then don't use it and swap to different ones. Culture of collaboration. We found that retrospectives and backlogs have been very useful for people. And there's also ways of working as well, which is pairing and working in the mobbing environment as well. And then there's technical practices such as CI/CD that you can use. So this is just a great resource where you can have a look at the different tools and techniques that you can use and then how you want to apply these within your organization. Here's some links that you can look at. So there's some very kind of DevOps-focused links. And the last link there, the Enterprises Project, that's aimed at kind of CIOs. So if you have management within your organization that you want to educate them more about DevOps, this is a good link to send them to have a look at. And that's all I've had to share. So I guess it's down to the questions now. So the first one, what are some good ways of making our industry more inclusive for men? That's an interesting question that I have there. I think it's a bit of a joke when someone's put, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So when you look at kind of diversity and inclusion, inclusion is really about making people feel comfortable. It's not about making people feel happy. So I would just say, whoever it is, think about how you can make somebody feel more comfortable within your team. What approaches does Red Hat apply to support and improve employees' motivation to collaborate and be a team player? So I think some of that is how can you kind of improve employees' motivation and collaborate to be a team player. I think at Red Hat we have a lot of employees that are in different locations, so a very distributed team. And oftentimes we have calls where sometimes you have people that are co-located in the office and then people dialing in remotely. We always try to have a rule where we ask people to put their video cameras on so we can see their faces. Sometimes this isn't possible if you're in certain environments, but it kind of encourages you to have that face-to-face contact. And also, if we've got like a discussion going, the people in the room ask those on the call first, do you have something that you want to add to the conversation and make a comment? So we try and make those remotees a priority, giving them first chance to say something, because it's easy for those within the room to have a conversation and then ignore those that are on the call. DevOps culture seems to share a lot with teal organizations. Do Red Hat plan to move in this direction? I'm not really sure what teal organizations are. Did anyone ask that question that wants to expand on it? If not, we'll move on. Who should be responsible for implementation and manage DevOps culture within an organization? As I said, you kind of need to have that leadership buy-in to get it going, to get the budgets and things in place. But really, everyone should share the responsibility and accountability. If you feel like you're owning the process, you're going to be more involved and more motivated to contribute towards it. So really, everyone should own it as well. What type of benefits do you have in Red Hat where you can spend your earned scores? So there's kind of a hub that you can go to. You can kind of get restaurant vouchers, shopping vouchers. You can buy experience days. I think if you save up enough points, you can get like a TV and a fridge and things like that as well. So it's quite interesting, actually. And I touched on the point about abusing the system. So there was some situations where people were kind of saying to their friend, I'll give you 50 points if you give me 50 points, and kind of just doing this kind of system, which goes against the purpose of it. So when you think about implementing new structures, you do have to put like approvals and authorities in place so people don't abuse it. And then also, this might work in some organizations, might not work in others. So you really have to think about how you do things and what's right for your organization. And I think that's all the questions. So thank you, everyone.